a journal that counts the mysterious deaths of 3 ambitious cavers. In this video, we will be diving into Ted's caving journal and see how this whole story connects to one of the biggest human fears. But before starting, I want to explain that in this video, I'll be analyzing the adaptation and the story at the same time. A big thanks to our Patreon supporter Pawn, as always, it means a lot. And I'm Sir Chris. I explore the internet and I make videos about it. Let's go. And before someone asks what happened to my voice, I might be getting sick, who knows. It all starts with the first entry before 2001, Floyd's Tomb, and the video introduces us to the main characters of this story, Ted and B, whose hobby was exploring caves. During the video, Ted explains that B had suffered an accident while exploring a cave, and the injuries were severe to the point the doctor said that he will never walk again. But due to his dedication and perseverance, he manages to not only walk again, but do what he loves the most, caving. But due to that, he doesn't put himself in extreme tight places, as Ted eventually does. They end up introducing and going deeper into the mysterious cave, and after walking for 1 hour, they reach the supposed end of the cave, which had something important. A hole the size of a fist. However, it was not a simple hole, because that hole had a narrow path that promised a virgin path, meaning that no one had dared to explore it. So, for the night, they both make a plan to start opening the hole on the next trip. And almost 1 month later, the second entry begins with them inside of the cave, which was now flooded due to the rain. Until they finally reach the end of the cave, and we see their plan in action. The plan consisted of using a hammer, ballpin, and a drill, in which they would take turns until the hole was big enough for Ted to squeeze in. As much as the plan seemed to be perfect, it would take longer than they thought, due to the rigidity of the stones. And before the second video ends, Ted notices that while they have been there, they could hear a constant rumbling. But they shrug it off, since the cave is under a road where heavy trucks would pass by. This is a behavior that prevails through the story. They hear a strange sound, justify it rationally, and get back to work, which makes it more credible since it is not their first time in a cave. The third entry is recorded the following day, in which Ted teaches more about caving while during his break, what gear and clothes to use, and exercises, while at the same time we get to know more about himself. Ted is a normal guy who was once claustrophobic, but after facing his fears, he got better and wanted to share his teachings with new cavers and family members, even if he was a little clumsy. And that's it. But the next entry is where things start to get more freaky. 12 days later, Ted and B return to the cave, but this time with a new guest, Whip, B's dog. As they get deeper in the cave, Whip's excitement turns into fear, to the point that she starts to whimper, stare at someone in the darkness, and starts to hide behind her owner. Or worse, as Ted said, she acted as if Satan himself was lurking in the darkness. Once again, Ted tries to justify her behavior by saying that maybe an animal had been inside of the cave, and she had felt the animal's scent. But that will not make things any better. But either way, nothing can go wrong, right? Whip's fear did not stop there, because when they finally reached the end of the cave, she was whimpering and stood there staring into the darkness of the hole while they worked. Hours later, B stopped out of nowhere and said that he heard a noise coming from the hole, like rocks scraping against each other, but they both ignored it and went back to what they were doing. When the battery dies, they both notice that the breeze had stopped, and Whip whimpers for the last time, and finally they call it a night. There's a sentence that the author wrote when he reread the diary that stuck with me. I can't believe how casual we were about everything that was happening in the cave. Now, weeks later, I think of my ignorance and naivete and shiver. They are running out of excuses to explain the rumblings and the breeze coming and going, which also weakens a worry that we also have, which is a lack of control and curiosity. We as humans tend to justify everything that happens with rational thinking, in a way that it even seems like we know what's happening when we don't, in which it pushes us to wanting to know why it is happening. In their case, they justified that the rumblings were due to heavy trucks from the road above, but the rumbling kept going even at 2 AM, at the time in which the road was, quote-unquote, dead, not a single soul to be seen. The fifth entry starts 21 days later, and it goes from 0 to 100 in a blink of an eye, because right from the start, we can see Ted running towards B, who had cut himself going down into the cave. After cleaning and patching him up, B says that it is totally normal, and he wants to keep going, and so they did. But before they start, they notice that the breeze and the rumbling had returned. And so, Ted begins. Later, during another Ted's shift, a scream comes from the direction of the hole, which causes both of them to freeze and stare at the hole. And this time, the breeze and the rumbling had stopped again. Whatever was on the other side of Floyd's tomb had woken up. This makes me think that every time the breeze or the rumblings stop, it's because the creature has woken up. But trying to shrug it off, B screams to get Ted's attention and says that they should finally leave, which was a smart choice. Even with what happened the night before, they still decide to return the next day. Whatever happens is not stopping them. The 6th entry cuts right to the action as it shows them working on the hole, until 20 minutes later, the hole was ready. Without wasting time, Ted tries to enter, but is stopped halfway through because of the rocks on the ground. But they affirm that on the next trip, it was definitive. They would enter. 33 days later, the next entry, exploring beyond Floyd's tomb, shows them both eager to finally get inside. After breaking some rocks from the ground, Ted finally manages to squeeze in and get into the other side of the cave. As Ted was alone, they both agreed that Ted would only explore for 30 minutes. But little did he knew what he would find. At the beginning of the cave, he doesn't find anything out of the ordinary. Crystals, strange stones, and even tight places. But even so, something wasn't right. As I entered the room, I had an eerie feeling. It was like the whole saying that I felt like I was being watched. Once again, the excitement of the new find faded, and the memories of the mysterious side of the cave crept back into mind. Suddenly, I felt very alone. As he goes deeper inside that cave, the feeling would only increase, and in one of the rocks, he finds a strange symbol with stick people beneath it. But since his 30 minutes are up, he ends up going back, and before going through the hole, he starts telling B what he found. Until halfway through the narrow path, Ted hears a noise and freezes until it becomes silent. Since he doesn't want to stay and see what it is, he hurries and finally leaves. When he finally returns back to B, we can see that Ted doesn't tell him about the strange things that happen inside of the cave. And it won't be the first time that this will happen. Since with that discovery, they both decide to bring someone else, which is not Whip, in case things go wrong. And oh boy, things would get worse. The 8th entry finally shows us a new character, Joe, another caver with a lot of experience. Upon arriving at Floyd's tomb, Ted and Joe pass through easily, but their enthusiasm is quickly extinguished from the moment that Ted bashes his head into a rock, starts bleeding, and thus stops him from continuing. Now Joe, the caver that knows nothing about what happened inside of the cave, is left alone to explore that disturbing abyss. So they both agree in Joe exploring the cave for only 20 minutes. But 20, 30 minutes pass, and no sign of Joe. So they both start calling for him until finally he returns, but full of wounds. And without saying anything, Joe walks towards the exit and Ted and B follow behind. Something attacked Joe on that cave, and it is from that day that both protagonists begin to dread that hole. So much so, that in the 9th entry, we should never have opened the cave, they returned without Joe and were morally affected. The gut-wrenching anxiety of going face to face with what attacked Joe. Ted explains that since that day, Joe has been sick to the point of taking 2 weeks off work and not talking to anyone, including Ted. And this eats away his mind to the point that Ted is finally scared for the first time. But as always, the search for answers takes the best of them. On the other side of Floyd's tomb, he ends up seeing what he saw last time, until he hears the sound of rocks scraping behind him and quickly looks back, hits his head on the ceiling, and breaks the light on his helmet. Crunch! My helmet crashed into the passage ceiling. Pain shot through my neck and down my back. My neck was nearly numb from the impact. Scared, in plain darkness, he rushes to try to find a source of light, only to be unsuccessful. But luckily he had glow sticks that weren't a big help. After a few minutes, he finds the phone and tries to call B, but he was met with the unforgivable silence. Somehow, he manages to find his flashlight and starts sprinting towards the narrow path that he came. But this time, he wasn't so alone as he once felt. While being chased, he manages to reach the hole. With that, he shouts to B to start running while saying a sentence that no one would like to hear.
There's something in here with us! There's something in here with us!
And so he starts pulling with everything that he has, despite the pain and panic. When getting out of the Floyd's tomb, he runs towards the rope to see it being slowly pulled. Whatever is after them doesn't want them to escape, and the video ends with Ted yelling at B to keep climbing, but luckily they both get out alive, for now. The 10th entry shows us the follow-up of the day before, and we can see that Ted has been in a tough situation. He has recently been unable to sleep, and has been hearing and seeing several hallucinations since the incident in the cave. The fear was so great that he will not even open the door to family members who were worried about him. And since that day, Ted and B had not spoken to each other, since they both, without knowing, were suffering from the same thing. Until one specific night, Ted feels an urge to see the city lights, and when arriving there, coincidentally, Joe is also there. They were both so miserable that they could tell by sight that they were going through the same thing, and without mentioning the cave, they had a little chat. We need to return. Tomorrow good? Yeah, noon. When they leave, Ted ends up stopping by B's house to say that they will return, and B, while maintaining a dead serious look, agreed. They must return. And on May 19th, Ted is preparing to return to the cave, and the gear he's taking this time is interesting. For the first time he's bringing a gun, knife, lots of food, water, and a first aid kit. And 2 hours later, they hit the road. And while going to the cave, he says something important. I cannot put this in better words. I'll simply show you what Ted said.
You're probably trying to understand why we decided to go back. I think closure has a nice fit to it, because I need to know what's at the end of that cave. I know a lot of you have disagreed with my pursuit of the cave. I've received a lot of messages, but I'm afraid I don't have a choice anymore. If I'm ever to experience restful sleep in my house again, I have to go back. If I ever want to walk in my home peacefully, I must return. It's not a choice anymore.
To all my friends and family that have been watching these videos, I just wanted to say, don't worry, I'll be okay. I expect to arrive either later tonight or tomorrow morning by the latest.
And they for the last time glimpse at the view as the weight of their decision lie on their shoulders before entering the cave for the last time. But this is where things get more darker. The story ends. There is no more entries. They never made it out. And if someone somehow stumbled inside that cave, they will find the remains of a tale of ambitious adventurers. They were exhausted, frightened, and sleep deprived. But that didn't stop them from being the brave idiots, as we knew in the beginning, never backing down until they found the answers. I had never read Ted the Caver, but this adaptation finally made me discover this creepypasta, and honestly it became one of my favorites. The reason this story is so disturbing is, first, of course it's caving, and it's because we can easily imagine real people in the protagonist's positions. The fear that doesn't scare away the desire to explore a place where no human has set foot, and the courage to hunt down and face the mistake that was tormenting them. Especially at the end, where without ever mentioning the cave, they didn't hesitate to put an end, or at least try, to finish what they started. And this, my friends, is why Ted the Caver is a terrifying story, and then an amazing adaptation. It's realistic, claustrophobic, and human. And since you liked this video, what about disturbing rabbit holes to keep you up at night? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you already know what to do. And take care, my friend.